Today we are going to continue to look at the Cuban United States in the Caribbean, and we're going to, well, before we went off, we started to look at Cuba. We look at the dictatorship in Cuba, military rule in Cuba. Now we're going to look at the causes of the Cuban Revolution. And there are several different causes for the Cuban Revolution, right? And how I have put it, because the exam papers are in such a way. What was the question like that I gave you for the homework? 1 second, let us check it.
Oh, and sir, speaking about the homework, we're supposed to give you the 3 points for each question, but only talk about two, but only like expound on two of them.
Yes.
Okay.
No, you don't need to give me the 3 points. You just need to give me 2 points.
And okay.
So for example, point 1, so the question here is, explain 3 political measures taken by Fidel Castro which contributed to the survival of the 1959 Cuban Revolution. Past paper question. You peel that question. So on the PowerPoint, you're going to put the point, and you put what is the point. Then you're going to give the examples, the evidence, not the example. You're going to explain, and then you link it back to the question or link it back to the point. So that is what we call the peel approach. Go ahead for me.
Sir, can you like give an example, like when they say link, sir, like would you say this is like, could you say something like this is how whatever example shows whatever points like an effect or something, sir? Or could you like give an example of a link, you know?
All right, so let us give you one perfect. So for a question like this, so let us use this one. U.S. economic control of Cuba. So if you're going to the exam and they ask you, explain 3 causes of the Cuban Revolution, right? 3 causes of the Cuban Revolution. One cause of the Cuban Revolution is U.S. economic control. So let us go here. So one of the causes of the Cuban Revolution is the U.S. economic control of Cuba. Now, so if you, when you go into the exam, you can say U.S. economic control was one cause of the Cuban Revolution, right? Examples of U.S. economic control. If we look at here, one of the causes that the U.S. would have controlled Cuba economically. The U.S. had 500, in terms of American imports, it valued 577 million. The U.S. would have invested 1.3 million into Cuba. The United States would have controlled the sugar industry, electricity company, the telephone company, commerce, land. 90% of the telephone and electricity company were actually owned by the United States. 50% of the public transportation sector was owned by the United States, and all the staff most of the staff who work in these industries were American. That is the evidence. So the evidence here, or the example, is that you could say one example of US economic control was let us use public, let us use it a different way. The US controlled the public transportation sector of, or the Cuban public transportation sector. They owned over 50% of this sector, right? Now, I'm coming to you, Miller. The point, so the question I get in the exam explained 3 causes of the Cuban Revolution. So one of the causes of the Cuban Revolution was the United States economic control. One example of this is that the US would have controlled the public transportation sector in Cuba. They owned over 50%. Now, the question I want to ask, which is the explanation, which is this: why was US economic control a cause for the Cuban Revolution? Or why was US economic control a disappointment for those Cubans wanting complete independence in their country? Miller, go ahead.
Oh, sir, I was asking, so for each point, right, how many examples should or can you give?
In the exam, it is always good to give at least 2 or give 2 examples the most.
Okay, sir, and then you explain both
And
examples.
then you explain.
Okay.
And then the next part now, after you finish your explanation, then you say, thus, US economic control was a great cause of the Cuban Revolution. You explain. So I want you now to explain now this point, because that is the point we are looking at now. So we are looking at causes. So one of the causes is that the US controlled Cuba economically. Most of the imports into Cuba came from the United States. The Americans invested a lot of money into Cuba. They owned almost everything. Now, if you're a Cuban living in Cuba during this time, how would you feel about the US controlling your country? Question to you. How would you feel?
Sir, it would make them want to, like, I don't rebel, because they weren't, although they were supposed to be free, they weren't actually free because the US is controlling everything they do.
Yes. So that is part of your explanation. Very good. Bartley?
Sir, I feel confused. And I say this because you're saying, okay, this is my country and we're a free country and we're supposed to be independent, but here is another country coming in, taking over, owning all our stuff and controlling us. So like, what is going on? I'd be confused in the leadership, the stability of our leadership or government.
So confusion, yes. So you're confused, you're not sure if you're independent or not. So that is also part of your explanation. So when you're explaining, you could mention that confusion is one. Anybody else? You live in Cuba during this time, and the US control the public transportation sector. All the staff that work in all of these areas were Americans. How would you feel? Tharp?
Sir, like piggybacking off what Kiana said, I'd feel confused because it's like it's my country, and why the people who are in charge of making sure that I am able to transverse is the word around my country are people who don't live in my country. I'd be concerned about my safety. I'd be concerned about the fact that the people who are being employed are not people from Cuba. So here you are. So we are providing employment for people who are not in Cuba, who are not Cubans.
Mm-hmm.
We're providing employment for these people who are not in Cuba. Therefore, that America is benefiting of the profits that we are making from our transportation system. Which
underline that word for me. Benefiting.
Oh.
Underline it.
Benefiting. It is underlined.
Very good point. Because one of the things that Cubans would be disappointed is that Cubans are going to say, we really don't have a problem with investment because people coming in and build roads and hotels and this and that is good. But guess what? We, the Cubans, are not benefiting, and that is why they are going to be very disappointed. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir.
You're not benefiting from it. You're not benefiting. You have the transportation sector, but when all of the money, when you pay your transportation fee, all the money goes back to the US. You're not benefiting. When you make a telephone call or you pay electricity bill, all the money goes back to the US. You're not benefiting. When you have the sugar industry and all of these different land, they control all of your land. You're not benefiting.
Most of the locals still unemployed.
Locals are still unemployed, so that's how you link it. Now you explain how to put yourself in the position of the Cubans. So the point is that they would have control. One cause of the Cuban Revolution was that the US would have controlled Cuba economically. How did they control Cuba economically? They control the public transportation sector, they control the telephone company, they control lands, they control all of these different stuff. How much of the land was controlled? Almost all the land. How much of the transportation sector? Over 50%. How did the Cubans feel about this that led them to revolt? The Cubans felt that they were not benefiting from all of the investment that the US had or would have made in their country. Therefore, it is very clear that because the Cubans were not benefiting or because they felt confused that they were supposed to control their own economic future destiny and their entire economy was controlled by the Cubans. They were not really sure if they were truly independent or not because another country controlled them. They were not sure. And so you explain the point and then you will link it. Therefore, that led to the Cuban Revolution. So you peel, this is how you peel to answer a question. All right, Williams,
Yes, sir.
you're following?
Yes, sir.
It makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Lawrence?
Sir.
Lawrence from A?
Yes, sir.
This makes sense?
Yes, sir. Like I had my hand up at one point, but you kind of said what I was going to say.
Who is that? I'm not seeing.
Lauren, I was going to
Okay.
say that adding on to the points that Kiana and
Yeah.
the others made, that basically Cuba, they felt like they were a colony of the US.
Very good. And if you put that in the quote and you said that the Cubans said that they were a colony of the US because the United States controlled all of their economy and they didn't want to be a colony. They wanted full independence. Trust me. You write this in the exam. When the examiner read it, 3 marks. Because this question would be 9 marks. They say point. US economic control was at 1. Examples were clearly shown. 2. Explain and link. 3. Full 3.
Sir,
Go ahead.
so you know how you said that whenever they would pay the in public transportation, whenever they would pay, the money would go to America. So sir, I was looking at it like the only reason why Cuba has 50% is because resources are in Cuba. Because if the money is going to the US, then the US basically owns all of it, but only because they're in Cuba, why it's 50%. If you understand what I'm saying.
That is true. Very correct. And you put that in part, you put that as part of your explanation. So when you're doing your PowerPoint, it shouldn't be long for you to present. You put your point, you put your example, you put your explanation, your link, and your link is just 1 sentence. You do that for all, and I would suggest, I say you must do 2, but do it for all 3. Because it is going to be, it could be a question that you get on the exam. If you start to do things like this, you put your point, you put your example, explain, link. Students, you're good.
Sir,
Remember, this is just 1. Go ahead for me.
sir, have paper 2 questions been repeated before?
Of course, papers or questions repeat every year.
Them just write it.
Especially the metropolitan adjustment questions.
Okay, sir.
Miller?
Sir, excuse me, so like for this question, right, sir, how you said it would be worth 9 marks, so it would be 3 for each point, sir. So what if, so like for that, no, sir, you can give 1 example and then you explain, and then for like if you were 4 marks, you give 2 or 3, like that's how you would word it?
Yes, that is how they usually do it. So if it were, so you're asking if it is like a 12 marks question?
Yes, sir.
Usually, if it's a 12-mark question, they want more explanation, additional explanation, and an additional example.
Okay, sir.
So, ladies, if we look right here, so US economic control was a cause for the Cuban Revolution. Another control was US. Another cause was US political control. How did the US control Cuba politically? How? We would have gone through this before.
Sir,
Go ahead.
sir, was it that like any problem that Cuba was facing, sir? Nobody else could intervene except the United States, I think.
Yes, perfect example. So anytime there was a problem in Cuba, what the US would have sent what to Cuba?
Military personnel.
The military. Immediately after the Cubans, after the Spanish-American War, the Americans would have implemented what type of government in Cuba?
Authoritarian, sorry.
No,
Sir,
they could say authoritarian, but it what type? It's same
Capitalist?
thing.
Dictatorship?
No,
Capitalists are like that, you mean? Or like
who controls the government?
The United States.
The United States control the government by the appointment of who? Who was the head of the government?
the president of United States?
Sir Gillian said the presidents of Cuba.
Immediately, so the war would have ended 1898. And then the Americans control Cuba. Who they had there? Immediately after.
Reagan.
They appointed a military governor. So they appointed a military governor immediately to control things in Cuba. Then what happened in 1902? What they did after they started elections, so Cubans can elect their own government. What they put to the Cuban Constitution, what was that called?
The plot amendments.
So another way in which they control them is through the plot amendment. And then Austin would have mentioned something very important, that between 1902, or we say 1906, to 1934, every time there was a problem in Cuba, they would have sent the military into Cuba. They would have sent the military into Cuba. These are examples how they would have controlled Cuba politically. So your point is that another cause for the Cuban Revolution is that the United States controlled Cuba politically. Ways in which they have controlled Cuba politically is that from as early as 1898, they would have appointed a military governor. They would have implemented the Platt Amendment. They explained what the Platt Amendment was. And every time there was a problem in Cuba, they sent the military into Cuba. Go ahead, Fami Bartley.
Sir, wasn't another political thing that the controlled presidents, like the corruption was high in Cuba?
Very good. So another point is through they control the presidents in the US, what we call puppet presidents. So all the Cubans who were elected, they control them.
Sir,
Like Batista, or he was
like Batista, but a lot more presidents, more than
Sir,
one.
I remember that from grade 9, was it?
9.
Yes.
Florencio Batista.
So now, if we look at this now, if we can see that they would have controlled them politically. So two causes that we look at. One, economic control by the US. They got upset. Political control. They wanted to govern their own country. They never want the US to be controlling them. They don't want their presidents to be pulled by the United States. That's how you explain. Another reason was Fulgencio Batista political abuse.
Greedy.
Evidence of his abuse. One, he censored the press, meaning nobody could not criticize him in the press.
North Korea vibes, sir.
Yes, anybody who opposed him could not have political meetings. And once he knew that you opposed him, he used to send firing squad, the military, to kill you. Political abuse, and not only that, the US supported Batista's political abuse of Cuba. These are the examples of political abuse. Next, another cause. So one cause they could look at is US economic control. Two, US political control. Three, Batista's abuse. Go ahead for me, Bartley.
Sir, I was thinking for one of the socioeconomic conditions, could it be like a language barrier? Because if like most of the Americans were, well, most of the staff are Americans, right? And so Americans spoke English and Cubans would have spoke Spanish. So would like the language barrier be a big problem?
It was a problem, but was not a major problem.
Okay, sir.
Or any way to get business going, you know, so that wouldn't bother them at all. Well, you know.
Poor economic control.
Socioeconomic.
Sorry, poor socioeconomic conditions in Cuba. So despite all the investment that the Cubans had there and all of the control that they had, the condition in Cuba remained poor. One,
so they were still unemployed. Ironically.
Yes. Why? Because most of the persons who are there employing are Americans. So you had Cubans were excluded from the economic investment. You had high unemployment, seasonal unemployment. So if they employ you for 2 months and then they said, you lay off and then I will take you back for another 2 months. There was a lot of death, malaria and tuberculosis deaths in the rural area. Doctors, not enough doctors to care patients. There were a lot of discrimination towards Cubans because Cubans could not go onto the beach. The different beaches and the hotels, they were banned. In your own country, the Americans had a lot of casinos and nightclubs and racetracks. And all the Americans male coming to Cuba to prostitute their females. They don't want your daughter and your children to be living as prostitutes. You don't want every time you're sick, you go to the hospital, there's no doctor there or enough doctor. You can't deal with the fact that there was a lot of unemployment. And so these are some of the reasons why they are going to say, listen, we want better socioeconomic conditions in Cuba. Go ahead, Fami Bartley.
Sir, one of the other socioeconomic conditions that many of the Cubans lived in the rural area that was poor, that they lived in slums and tenement yards, while like Havana and places that were well constructed, you know?
That is true.
Sir?
Go
Sir,
ahead.
this is giving me very much North Korea, like, honestly.
Sir, in most of the places where some of the locals live, there were no running water or electric lights, and the sanitation facilities were
very poor.
very poor. Yeah.
Some examples of poor socioeconomic conditions. Another thing, ladies, is that, and another serious point that I believe Barty would have brought up was the language. And we could put the language on it. We could discuss that the Americans translated, so for example, they translated their textbooks in the US and they send it to Cuba. And so they are using Cuban textbook. Instead of learning about Cuba, they are learning about the 50 states or 51 states of the US. Instead of learning about Cuba, you're learning about US president. Instead of singing your national anthem, they want you to teach they are singing American national anthem.
Crazy.
And so they were upset. Another thing is that the elections, almost every election from 1906 was rigged. And Cubans want better election practices there. A group that we cannot ignore, and I want you to define these two terms, imperialism and anti-imperialism, right? Because I don't want you going to the exam and see the word imperialism. Imperialism is when another country controls another country. Anti-imperialism means that you don't want anybody to control your country. You should have full control of your country. And so another cause of the Cuban Revolution was that an anti-imperialist group emerged. And these were radical students. Persons like Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and the others. Most of them were university students or university graduates. They were tired of the oppression and the abuse by Cubans and also by the Americans. And so this was also a cause for the Cuban Revolution. Because had not this group emerged, then everybody would have just sit back and say, all right, this is how God wants it. We can't do anything about it.
There
Go ahead for me.
was one of the causes, like linking it to this, sir, was
Yeah.
it like Fidel Castro's writings while he was in prison?
You could add it. You almost 4 to 5 causes for the Cuban Revolution. Easy stuff. So if you're going to the exam and they ask you about the causes, you do your 5. If it's a full 25 marks question, you know you have to discuss 4 to 5 causes. So the first thing is that you have the work to do as a group. When is the group work? Is it tomorrow?
No, sir. You said we must have
Thursday.
Okay, Thursday. So tomorrow we meet again. So tomorrow we're going to meet. On Thursday, you're going to have the group work and present on Monday.
Okay, sir.
All right, so tomorrow we meet, and then on Thursday, you're going to meet in your group and you're going to peel like you're in an exam. Peel the question and answer it. But I need to see P and you need to show me the point. I need the example, I need to see the explanation, and I need to see the link. Everybody, each member in the group need to participate in the activity. It is to help to build everybody's writing skills and to familiarize yourself with the question. All right, ladies. So we meet again tomorrow where we wrap up.
Okay, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.